quiet English village, a few hours' drive from London, a threat was delivered to a local farmer. Impaled on a fence post, a severed lamb's head, along with the message, "You next." The note said little about its author, but between the lines, it said plenty. Nestled among the lush rolling hills of England's West Country is the tiny village of Horton, a cluster of houses lining one main street. A farming community where life is simple, quiet, and peaceful. But in the spring of 1984, the peace and quiet was shattered following a series of bizarre events that took place here at Widden Hill Farm. 44-year-old Graham Backhouse and his wife Margaret lived at the farm with their 2 children. Backhouse had inherited the farm from his father, but by all accounts, Backhouse, a former hairdresser, was not having financial success as a farmer.
He had to take over the farm. He had no option in the business. And there was pretty obvious that he was a kind of reluctant, grudging farmer. But it was well known that the farm was not making money.
On March 30th, 1984, Backhouse reported a grisly and terrifying discovery. A severed lamb's head had been impaled on his fence post, placed next to it a note warning in large handwritten letters, "You next." Backhouse told police that this wasn't the first time threats had been made against him.
He told me that he was receiving telephone calls of a threatening nature, even threats to kill, as I recall.
Backhouse also told police about a threatening letter he had received in the mail,
which said words to the effect, "You have ruined my sister's life. I'm going to get you, you bastard."
Less than 2 weeks later, the threats turned violent. Margaret Backhouse was heading into town to do some shopping. She decided to take her husband's car because her car was having some mechanical difficulties. Graham was in the barn and never heard the explosion or Margaret's screams for help over the music from his radio. The bomb was unsophisticated but extremely powerful. It had been planted directly under the driver's seat.
Strictly speaking, it wasn't a bomb. It was a shortened version of a shotgun. It was constructed from a galvanized steel pipe, 2-inch diameter, quite a thick wall to the pipe.
Margaret Backhouse survived the explosion because the force of the bomb was directed downwards by the high-quality construction of the driver's seat. But doctors still had to remove more than a pound of pellets and shrapnel from Margaret Backhouse's body. The bombing stunned villagers who now had to accept the fact that the threats against Graham Backhouse were serious.
When bombs go off, you've got to take it seriously. And people were thinking that there must be something behind this. It was the only possible conclusion that we all reached, that the bomb must have been for Graham Backhouse.
But who wanted Graham Backhouse dead? And why? On the same day of the car bomb explosion which seriously injured Margaret Backhouse, a threatening letter was delivered to the Backhouse farm.
And the message said something to the effect, "Came twice last week, but the pigs were about."
The note ended with the words, "See you soon." The words "twice" and "were" had both been misspelled, and experts believed that the spelling errors were deliberate. Investigators also examined the note found beside the severed lamb's head, the one which stated, "You next." An analysis of that note revealed a possible clue, an impression from a circular doodle. When a doodle is made on a piece of paper, the pressure from the writing instrument leaves an impression on the pages underneath the original doodle. doodle impressions can be found using a technique called oblique lighting, which casts shadows across the indentations of the paper.
So that you can see the impression as a row of shadows, and these can then be photographed.
Police asked Graham Backhouse to identify all individuals who may have wanted to harm him.
He was interviewed at some length about who his enemies were, who his ex-girlfriends were, and things of that nature.
Backhouse told police about one possibility. A former quarry worker named David Hodkinson. Backhouse said he once had a sexual affair with Hodkinson's wife. Hodkinson would have had access to explosives and was also an electrician who specialized in wiring automobiles.
On the day the explosion took place, this person was in fact out of the country on holiday and had been out of the country for 3 or 4 days beforehand.
When Hodkinson's alibi checked out, police turned their attention to one of Graham Backhouse's neighbors, Colin Bedale Taylor. He was a retired engineer, seriously depressed over the death of his 19-year-old son Digby, who died in a car crash 2 years earlier. Bedale Taylor and Backhouse were involved in a bitter land dispute which they couldn't seem to resolve. They lived 200 yards apart. Colin Bedale Taylor was well liked in the small farming community. He was a woodworker and handyman who built this bench for his friends in the village with the words, "Bide a while," inscribed on the backrest. Despite the differences between Backhouse and Bedale Taylor, police did not seriously consider him a suspect in the car bombing.
There was no reason to suspect that Mr. Bedale Taylor was in any way, shape or form involved in this incident.
With no other leads, Backhouse and his family were given 24-hour police protection immediately following the bombing. After a week, Graham Backhouse began to resent the police intrusion and asked them to end the around-the-clock protection. Before they left, police installed an alarm button connecting the Backhouse home directly to the police station. Just 2 weeks later, the alarm sounded.
Police cars began streaming up the hill. We knew that something was seriously wrong.
When the police arrived at the farm, they saw a horrific scene of blood and death. Blood was found on the kitchen floor. The chairs had been overturned. And at the bottom of the stairs at the end of a hallway lay the body of Colin Bedale Taylor, Backhouse's neighbor. He had been shot twice in the chest. In his right hand, firmly clutched, was a Stanley knife inscribed with his own initials, CBT. Backhouse was bleeding profusely with gaping slash wounds on his face and chest.
Well, I'd pop in to see how your wife is faring.
She's doing very well, thank
He
you.
told police that Bedale Taylor stopped by to ask how his wife was doing in the hospital following the car bombing.
Justice?
Without warning, Colin flew into a rage and attacked Backhouse with a Stanley knife.
Me that set the bomb in your car. You should have been the victim, not her!
He said he was doing God's work, blamed Backhouse for the death of his son, and admitted planting the car bomb. Backhouse ran to the hallway, grabbed his shotgun, and shot Bedale Taylor in self-defense. Police roped off the farm and called for forensic detectives to conduct an examination. They were particularly interested in the blood trails, the one they could see and the one they couldn't find. Graham Backhouse told police that he killed Colin Bedale Taylor in self-defense after his neighbor went berserk and attacked Backhouse with a Stanley knife. Backhouse said his neighbor admitted planting the car bomb and that it was intended for him, not his wife. When police searched Bedale Taylor's property, they found evidence linking him to the bombing.
We found a long section of pipe on grounds quite close to Colin Bedale Taylor's home, and this matched the remnants of the bomb that were reconstructed.
The obvious implication was that the pipe bomb had been made by him and come from his land.
But forensic detectives were confused by what they found at the scene of the attack. First, the blood spatter on the kitchen floor told a story, but it was a story inconsistent with Backhouse's version of events.
The staining was predominantly in the form of small, circular drips of blood.
The circular drops of blood found on the kitchen floor were not consistent with a struggle, but indicated that the blood dripped from an individual standing still.
Blood dripping vertically to a surface during a passive act of bleeding will form circular spots or stains. But if we have a violent movement of the body, the flicking of the hand, see a different shape of stain. They're more elongated, and some of the stains will show a tail shape to them, pointing in the direction of travel that the blood impacted the surface.
And there was something missing. Backhouse said he ran for his life from the kitchen down the hall to get his gun. But police could find no trail of blood.
We seem to have a man who was dripping blood profusely in the kitchen, manages to move over 15 foot of carpeted hallway without leaving any drips of blood.
And police were faced with another discrepancy. Backhouse said he shot the Dale Taylor after his face and chest had been slashed, but his blood was not found on the gun. Had he been attacked before firing the gun, blood from his face wound or from his hands would have dripped onto the gun as he fired in self-defense.
So both features missing from the gun suggested that he wasn't bleeding and hadn't blood staining on him at the time that he picked up that gun.
The victim was found clutching the Stanley knife firmly in his right hand. The forensic pathologist found this highly unusual.
When somebody's shot, or when somebody dies, they go limp. So then I would expect to see the response, or the body's response to being shot twice in the chest, and death taking place simply to relax, and the knife would fall from the hand. It wouldn't be clutched tightly in the hand.
And Bedale Taylor's right palm was bloody. When an individual holds a knife during an attack, the knife usually prevents blood from staining the entire palm.
There's an area of the palm which is either very lightly stained with blood or not stained with blood. The knife protects that part of the palm.
Backhouse's chest wound was also inconsistent with the struggle.
Because normally if you're cut, you withdraw. Your body jerks away. So how on earth are you going to get a wound which then travels almost half the circumference of the chest? In a one-to-one confrontation, I would never expect to see that pattern of injury.
And Backhouse had no defensive injuries commonly found when a person fends off a knife attack.
They actually grab hold of the weapon itself, and they get cuts across their fingers and the palm. And sometimes you find that they've tried to block the weapon, put their hand up, and they get cuts in the back of the forearm, or the side of the forearm, or on the back of the hand. None of these were present here.
And there was something else, something small, but significant. When police searched Backhouse's study, they found a notepad. On one of the pages was a circular doodle. The ink doodle found on Backhouse's notepad was identical to the impression found on the "You Next" note.
It was a whole series of circles, quite a complicated thing. The impressions were quite deep so that you had a good photograph and you were able to get a good alignment, and you could see clearly that it came from this doodle. It was exactly the same. There was no doubt whatsoever about it. This is the doodle that we're talking about here. You can see just various scribble. When we turn the page, I think you can still see the impression. This note is now very old and has been well handled, so it's not terribly clear now, but it is still there. You can just see it there. Still see the impression just there.
Proof that the "You Next" note was written on Graham Backhouse's own notepad.
We now had a document in the form of the "You Next" note that we could positively link with Widden Hill Farm.
Police believed they could now piece together the bizarre events which led to the cold-blooded murder of Colin Bedale Taylor. After 2 straight years of crop failures, Graham Backhouse was £50,000 in debt to a local bank and was in desperate need of funds. Backhouse devised an elaborate scheme to get out of debt once and for all. His plan was to kill his wife and collect on her life insurance policies, which he had recently doubled to £100,000. But he wanted the murder to appear as if Margaret had been killed by someone out to kill him. So Backhouse fabricated the story about the threatening phone calls and letters. Backhouse himself wrote the "You Next" note and impaled the severed lamb's head on his fence post, establishing the ruse that someone was out to get him. With the stage now set, Backhouse turned his attention to the murder of his wife. He planted a pipe bomb under the driver's seat of his own car. He knew his wife would drive his car into town the next morning because her car was having mechanical problems. But Backhouse never expected his wife to survive the explosion. Desperate and fearing the police would consider him a suspect, Backhouse panicked and decided to set up a scapegoat, someone to divert the police inquiry from himself. The logical choice was his neighbor, Colin Bedale Taylor.
I'm fine.
Thanks for coming about the furniture. I'm so
Villagers
excited.
knew that the two were involved in a land dispute. When Bedale Taylor accepted Graham's invitation to discuss a piece of furniture, he had no way of knowing he had walked into a death trap.
Going?
Colin was shot twice in the chest in cold blood. To make the shooting appear to be in self-defense, Backhouse slashed himself in the face and chest with a knife he had inscribed with his neighbor's initials. Bleeding profusely from the self-inflicted wounds, Backhouse overturned kitchen chairs to make it appear there had been a struggle, never realizing the shape of the blood spatter would indicate no struggle at all. Backhouse's own blood was found on the victim's shirt because he stood directly over the body when he placed the knife in the dead man's hand. With the crime scene now complete, Graham Backhouse called the police. Sometime earlier, Backhouse planted a piece of pipe on Bedale Taylor's property, identical to the type used in making the car bomb. When the forensic evidence contradicted Backhouse's version of events, he was arrested for both the attempted murder of his wife and the murder of Colin Bedale Taylor. In addition to the blood spatter evidence, the doodle impression found on Backhouse's notepad, and the medical examiner's opinion that the cuts on Graham Backhouse were self-inflicted, another crucial piece of evidence helped seal the case. It came from the letter delivered to the Backhouse farm on the day of the bombing. Forensic detectives wanted to analyze the glued envelope for saliva, hoping to determine the blood type of the individual who sent the letter, but they discovered much more. Under the microscope, the fiber found in the envelope matched fibers found in a brown cardigan sweater owned by Graham Backhouse. Further proof that Backhouse had mailed the threatening letter to himself. Graham Backhouse's plotting continued from his prison cell. He conned a fellow prisoner into smuggling out an unsigned letter to a local newspaper. The letter implicated Colin Bedale Taylor in the car bombing, but the letter was confiscated, and Backhouse's handwriting matched the handwriting on the letter delivered to the farm on the day of the bombing. After a 16-day trial, Graham Backhouse was convicted of all charges against him and received 2 life sentences.
If somebody had set out to write a novel along those lines, it would never have been accepted by anybody. I mean, this is absolutely truth being stranger than fiction.
This was an outstanding case in many respects, principally because without forensic evidence, there was no case.
The worst aspect was, of course, the fact that he picked on a totally innocent man in the village and killed him for no other reason than to try to remove blame from himself. And that's what made it a diabolical murder.
So, Steve, I see you have your Breakfast of Champions there with you?
Janet McDermott planned to stop by her office only briefly on the morning of October 15, 1985.
Have a nice day, Steve.
She had a number of business appointments around Salt Lake City that day. Moments later, an explosion rocked the building, killing her colleague who worked next door. Science uncovered a tale of forgery, fraud, and murder. The explosion occurred on the 6th floor of the historic Judge Building in downtown Salt Lake City. Killed in the blast was 31-year-old Steve Christensen, a financial consultant who left behind his wife Terry and a young family.
He was lying in the doorway of his office, and he was lying on his right side, burn marks on his face, smoke marks, and blood.
The explosion ripped the door off its hinges, and the location of the debris told investigators that the blast occurred directly in front of Steve Christensen's office door.
You could tell the precise location where the bomb exploded. Match that with the autopsy, and we could tell where the bomb was when it exploded because of its shearing power, breaking bones, going through skin, things of that nature.
Small pieces of batteries and fragments of pipe were found in the hallway as well. Many of the parts had the name Tandy imprinted, a brand sold exclusively in Radio Shack electronic stores. All of the fragments were collected and pieced back together, revealing that the explosion was caused by a pipe bomb. This is a replica of the type which was used. But who wanted to kill Steve Christensen, and why? Christensen had recently resigned his job as Vice President of Consolidated Financial Services, or CFS, a real estate investment company which was undergoing serious financial difficulties. Many clients had lost large sums of money, and some were alleging fraud. In the debris, police discovered a piece of brown wrapping paper with Christensen's first name written in thick black marker. Bruce Passy had a jewelry business a few floors below Steve Christensen's office. He told police he noticed something unusual in the elevator that morning.
I told them that I saw a box this morning that had the name Steve Christensen, and that my father and I went up an elevator with the gentleman holding this box.
Janet McDermott recalled seeing the package in the hallway directly in front of Steve Christensen's office door. A motion-sensitive mercury switch was found in the debris, an indication that the bomb was activated by tilting the package. Motion-sensitive bombs are almost always delivered by the bombers themselves, so they can be delivered without going off. Bruce Passy described the delivery man as a white male about 5 feet 8 inches tall with medium brown hair.
Once he came in, he was wearing a high school leather jacket without the letter on it, but it had the colors of a leather jacket.
I was just very concerned for the business community and that other people might be involved on a revenge type situation, whether it be for investments or gone bad or something similar to that. And I was worried who would be the next victim.
That worry became reality just 2 hours later. 2 hours after the bombing which killed Steve Christensen, there was another explosion across town. This time, the victim was 50-year-old Kathy Sheets. Her husband, Gary, was the former business partner of Steve Christensen.
It was real devastating to have your mother killed on your front doorstep. You feel that you're safe in your home and that it's okay, and to have something like that happen really shattered your faith that things are okay.
Once again, the fragments recovered at the scene were consistent with a pipe bomb. Police found scraps of brown paper near the blast with the name of the victim's husband, Gary Sheets.
The time I got to the second scene, I already knew what I was looking for, if there were going to be similarities. Within 25 minutes, I had found the similarities. Within 5 hours, I found a component. That component was a very small piece of a mercury switch.
A mercury switch was found at the Christensen bomb site as well. A mercury switch is a glass ball filled with mercury, a liquid metal. When the mercury is tilted, it completes the electrical circuit, triggering the explosion.
We had a lot of similarities, and they would include the cardboard container, the types of tape, more than one type, the size of the pipe, that which includes the diameter and the length, the explosive inside, the type of explosives inside.
Gunpowder from both bomb sites were sent to the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms lab for analysis. They store samples of every known gunpowder manufactured. The particles of gunpowder from the pipe bombs were placed on a profile projector, which measures the size and shape of the granules. When this information was entered into a computer database, the gunpowder was identified as Hercules Bullseye brand. The same type was used in both bombs. Since Radio Shack batteries and electrical components were found at both bomb sites, detectives checked all of the Radio Shack stores in the Salt Lake City area. Records showed that an individual by the name of Mike Hansen had recently purchased the same components from this Radio Shack store in Holiday, Utah. The store had an address for Mike Hansen, but it was a vacant lot, and detectives suspected that the name was an alias. The only individual who reported seeing anything suspicious at the Sheets' home was a 13-year-old neighbor, Aaron Teplick. He told police he saw a tan Toyota minivan turn into the Sheets' driveway around midnight, the night before the bombing. He said the van drove out of the Sheets' driveway a few minutes later, but the boy could offer no description of the driver.
I think we have a serial bomber out there. What was entering into my mind was, how soon are we going to have another bombing?
It was a very short wait. While investigators were sifting through the rubble of the bombings which killed Steve Christensen and Kathy Sheets, there was a third explosion the very next day. This time, it happened in a parked car in downtown Salt Lake City. The victim was 30-year-old Mark Hoffman, a rare documents dealer. Unlike the other two victims, Hoffman survived the blast. Hoffman's injuries were severe. The explosion blew off the tips of 2 fingers. A portion of his right kneecap was missing, and a piece of metal was embedded in his knee.
Mark Hoffman said that he pulled open the door and the package fell from the seat of the car onto the floorboard of the car, at which time it exploded and he was injured.
Mark Hoffman had no connection with the CFS Corporation. He was a well-known and respected rare documents dealer who specialized in early Mormon currency and documents. But Mark Hoffman and Steve Christensen knew one another. Christensen was a collector of rare books and documents and had purchased some items from Hoffman over the years. One thing detectives knew: the bombs which killed Steve Christensen, Kathy Sheets, and seriously injured Mark Hoffman were all made by the same individual. They also knew that evidence inside Mark Hoffman's car was inconsistent with what he told police. Hoffman said someone placed a package on the seat of his car, and when he opened the car door, the package fell onto the floor and exploded. But when a pipe bomb explodes, the end caps blow out in a straight line. One of the end caps blew a hole through the side door on the passenger side. The other end cap was found in Mark Hoffman's knee. This important detail told investigators that the bomb did not explode on the floor of the car, as Hoffman indicated.
Didn't line up with the exploding bomb. And we can't change that because of the holes in the vehicle. That's a true. It's now taking the injured pieces of the individual, putting them so they come in contact with the bomb.
The injury to Hoffman's knee indicated that his right knee was on the driver's seat at the time of the explosion. And the injuries to Hoffman's fingers indicated that he had been touching the bomb when it exploded.
So now we have an injured hand, an injured leg, and I know the attitude the pipe bomb was in. I also know that he has uninjured body parts. The other leg is in very good shape. There's not even any burn damage. So I have part of him outside the car, part of him inside the car.
The evidence revealed that the bomb exploded over the center console, in between the two front seats, and not on the floor of the vehicle, as Hoffman indicated. When police searched Mark Hoffman's home, they found a high school letter jacket with the letter missing, similar to the one Bruce Passy saw on the delivery man in the elevator on the morning of Steve Christensen's murder. Even more alarming, police discovered that Hoffman owned a tan-colored Toyota minivan similar to the one the teenage boy saw driving into the Sheets driveway the night before the bombing. Inside Hoffman's van, police discovered a single flake of gunpowder. Tests revealed that it was Hercules bullseye gunpowder, the same type used in making the pipe bombs.
We had no idea why Mark Hoffman, if he were the perpetrator, would kill a close associate and friend of his, Steve Christensen. And for all we knew, he didn't even know Kathleen Sheets.
Hoffman told police that he was a victim and even took a lie detector test to prove his innocence.
We've had him take a polygraph and he passed with flying colors. Not even close. He passed with a high number saying that he was not deceptive and that he did not do the bombings.
Despite the polygraph results, investigators were suspicious of Mark Hoffman since the scientific evidence was inconsistent with his description of the bombing. On the day of Steve Christensen's murder, Mark Hoffman was scheduled to meet with Mormon church officials to discuss some early Mormon documents he was selling known as the McClellan Collection. Steve Christensen was active in the Mormon church and was asked to attend that meeting in order to certify that the documents were authentic.
As I was inquiring about who examined the documents, it was my feeling it had never been examined forensically.
George Throckmorton was asked to do just that, to use scientific forensic methods to find out whether some of the world's leading experts had been fooled. Despite the fact that Mark Hoffman passed a lie detector test, bomb experts from the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms were convinced that Mark Hoffman was inside his automobile, possibly arming the bomb when it accidentally exploded. The scientific evidence supported their theory, but missing was a motive.
How you prove Mark Hoffman was a murderer is you first proved that he was a con man, that his whole life was based upon fraud.
George Throckmorton is a forensic document examiner who was asked to examine the rare documents Mark Hoffman had sold over the years. He compared them to other rare documents the Mormon Church had in its vault from the same time period which Hoffman had nothing to do with. Under ultraviolet light, many of the documents Hoffman sold turned blue. This was not the case with the documents the Mormon Church obtained from other sources. Under a microscope, Throckmorton noticed that the ink on Hoffman's documents ran in one direction. In the other documents, the ink was absorbed by the paper uniformly, spreading in all directions. And Throckmorton discovered microscopic cracks in the ink on the documents Hoffman uncovered. Throckmorton calls it alligatoring. And there was none of this in any of the other documents.
At this point, it made us say something's wrong, but we don't know what. Why are Hoffman's documents different than the other documents?
When Mark Hoffman's home was searched following the bombings, police discovered a book which contained a recipe for iron gallatanic ink, an ink that was common in the 1800s. Throckmorton made a batch of that ink and wrote with it on some paper. He then applied an ammonia solution which is known to age paper. The test document displayed the same blue haze under ultraviolet light. And when it was hung to dry, the ink ran in one direction and exhibited the same alligatoring condition as the Hoffman documents. Finally, Throckmorton turned his attention to the Oath of a Freeman, believed to be the oldest printed document in the United States. It was a document Mark Hoffman said he purchased in a used bookstore and was valued at over $1 million. It had been authenticated by both the Library of Congress and the FBI. When Throckmorton looked at it closely, he found a curious anomaly. There was a tiny flaw in the letter M.
That microscopic flaw was not caused by old age, was not caused by a printing problem. It was caused through the photographic process. Therefore, that document had to go through that photographic process.
The flaw looked like emulsion on a photographic negative. This modern printing method did not exist in 1638 when the Oath of a Freeman was allegedly written.
Therefore, it had to be counterfeit.
Inside Hoffman's home, police discovered a receipt from a printing company in Utah. It was for a printing plate for the Oath of a Freeman document. The printing company thought the plate was used to print facsimiles. In fact, it was. Hoffman took the plate, added the old ink recipe and a piece of old paper to create the forgery, and offered it for sale as an original. On the receipt was the name Mike Hansen, but it included Mark Hoffman's telephone number. It was the same name used at the Radio Shack store to purchase the bomb components. Throckmorton's forensic document examination proved that Hoffman was a fraud and a forger. Prosecutors believed that Steve Christensen was on to Mark Hoffman and was about to expose him as a liar and possibly a fraud. Hoffman sensed this and decided to murder Steve Christensen with a pipe bomb. But Hoffman wanted Christensen's murder to appear to be business-related, so he delivered a diversionary bomb to Christensen's former business partner, Gary Sheets. The boy living across the street saw a van similar to Hoffman's pull into the Sheets' driveway around midnight. Hoffman placed the pipe bomb package on the front walkway to the Sheets' home. The next morning, Hoffman delivered the primary bomb to Steve Christensen's office building. It was packed with more than 100 masonry nails, leaving no doubt that its intent was to kill, not injure.
And I have to...
The jewelry store owner identified Mark Hoffman as the man wearing the leather jacket in the elevator. He was carrying a package addressed to Steve Christensen. Hoffman left the package outside Christensen's office door. It was armed with a motion-sensitive mercury switch set to explode when tilted at a 45-degree angle.
Bye. Have a good day, Steve.
Steve Christensen picked up the package when he arrived for work. Two hours later, Kathy Sheets noticed the package left outside her home, addressed to her husband, Gary. Mark Hoffman was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder and for theft by deception for selling forged documents. Hoffman pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was convicted. A parole board recommended that he spend the rest of his life in prison. Ironically, many of Hoffman's forgeries are still on the market.
Every single document that I looked at had been forged or manipulated in some way to make it valuable. And I looked at over 600 of his documents. Every single one of them was forged. He never found a single genuine document ever.
And the deception turned a mild-mannered documents dealer into a killer.
I think Mark is probably the most evil of people that I've worked with. Serial bombers, by and large, are much more evil. They don't want to just hurt you. They want to continue to hurt many people.
And how common is it for a bomber to blow himself up when handling one of his own bombs?
Not common enough.
It begins with a sound that never makes the evening news. Not a scream, not a gunshot, just a quiet click of a porch light switching off in rural Tennessee, sometime after midnight, the moment when the world decides nothing important is happening anymore. That assumption is the first mistake, because on that night, in a town so small it barely registers on a state map, something slips out of alignment. A life veers off an expected path. And decades later, when an arrest finally comes, people will swear they always felt it. Something wrong, something unfinished, lingering in the air like humidity before a storm. The road is narrow, 2 lanes cutting through fields that go dark early. No streetlights, no witnesses lingering. Houses spaced far enough apart that privacy feels guaranteed. This is where trust lives comfortably. This is where doors stay unlocked. This is where neighbors wave instead of watch. And this is where the cold case is born, not with violence that announces itself, but with absence. A missing person, a car that doesn't return, a routine broken just once, and then forever. By morning, the town wakes to rumors before it wakes to facts. Someone didn't show up for work. Someone didn't answer phone. Someone's truck is still parked where it shouldn't be. The details don't line up yet, but the feeling does. A low murmur spreads through diners and gas stations, through church steps and school parking lots. Something has happened. Nobody wants to say it out loud, because saying it gives it weight. Saying it makes it real. Law enforcement responds the way it always does at first. Measured, cautious, procedural. They call it a welfare check. They knock on doors. They ask questions that sound routine, but land heavily. When was the last time you saw them? Did they mention plans? Did anything seem off? The answers are all the same. No, no, no. Everything was normal. And that word, normal, becomes the most unsettling clue of all. The house shows no signs of struggle. No broken glass. No blood. No forced entry. The kind of scene that investigators both hope for and dread. Hope for because it means there's time. Dread because it means there's nothing obvious to grab onto. The kind of case that slips easily into the cracks if you're not careful. The kind that demands patience, resources, and a willingness to believe that something terrible can happen quietly. Search parties form before noon. Volunteers fan out across tree lines and creek beds, calling a name that echoes back unanswered. Dogs are brought in. Helicopters circle low, chopping the air above fields that look peaceful from a distance. Every overturned rock, every discarded bottle, every footprint becomes a possibility. And every hour that passes without answers tightens the knot in the community's chest. By the second day, the language shifts. Missing becomes missing under suspicious circumstances. Welfare check becomes investigation. Hope is still there, but it's thinner now, stretched over growing fear. The family waits by the phone, jumping at every ring. They replay conversations, search for hidden meanings, convince themselves they missed something obvious. Guilt creeps in quietly. If only we had asked one more question. If only we had stayed longer. If only. Investigators start building timelines on whiteboards and legal pads. They draw lines that intersect and diverge, marking last sightings, last calls, last confirmed moments of normalcy. But the timeline refuses to behave. Gaps appear where there shouldn't be any. Time stretches in strange ways, compressing here, disappearing there. A witness remembers something days later. Another recants. Memory proves unreliable under pressure, and pressure is everywhere. Then come the tips. Some are earnest, some are wild, some are clearly driven by fear, others by boredom, others by old grudges waiting for an excuse to surface. A suspicious vehicle, a stranger at the bar, a sound heard late at night. Each tip demands attention, and each one drains time. The investigators follow them anyway, because the alternative, missing the right one, is unthinkable. The case starts to harden around a single, uncomfortable truth. There is no clean narrative, no obvious suspect stepping forward under the weight of their own guilt, no dramatic discovery that forces the story into focus. Instead, there's silence. And silence in a case like this is not neutral. It presses in. It reshapes priorities. It tests resolve. Weeks pass, then months. The search scales back, officially at first, then emotionally. Volunteers return to their routines. The helicopters stop flying. The dogs are reassigned. What remains is paperwork, boxes of evidence, and a family suspended in a state that is neither mourning nor relief. Not know becomes its own form of trauma, a wound that never closes because there is no moment of impact, no definitive end. The town changes in subtle ways. Doors start locking at night. Children are called inside earlier. People glance twice at unfamiliar cars. Trust doesn't disappear, but fractures. Conversations lower when certain names come up. Old relationships are re-examined through a new lens. Who was where? Who knew whom? Who benefited from silence? Inside the sheriff's office, the case file grows heavier. Photographs fade slightly with each copy. Cassette tapes sit labeled and untouched. Evidence bags are sealed with the confidence of people who believe answers are just around the corner. But corners keep appearing, one after another, leading nowhere. The case earns a new designation, one no investigator wants to sign, but eventually must. Cold. Cold does not mean forgotten. Not officially. It means waiting. Waiting for technology to catch up. Waiting for someone to talk. Waiting for a mistake. Waiting for time itself to loosen what fear and loyalty have kept tight. The file is shelved, but it never really leaves the building. It lingers, pulled out during quiet shifts, revisited by fresh eyes that hope experience will reveal what proximity could not. Years pass. New cases arrive louder, messier, easier to find. The cold case recedes into institutional memory, known by a name, a date, a single haunting photograph. To the community, it becomes a story told carefully with qualifiers and lowered voices. To the family, it becomes a permanent present. Every birthday, every holiday, every empty chair. And then, decades later, something changes. Not all at once, not dramatically. A development so small it almost goes unnoticed at first. A policy update, a database expanded, a technique refined. The kind of progress that doesn't promise miracles, but quietly makes them possible. The case is reopened not with fanfare, but with paperwork. A box pulled from storage. Evidence handled again, this time with tools that didn't exist when the porch light went out. No one announces it to the town. No one wants to raise expectations. But inside the investigation, a current starts moving again. Old assumptions are questioned. Timelines are redrawn. Silence is treated not as an absence, but as a pattern. And somewhere in the past, buried beneath years of routine and denial, the truth shifts. Not enough to reveal itself, just enough to crack. The community doesn't feel it yet. Life continues. The road stays quiet at night. Porch lights still click off. But the cold case is no longer sleeping. It is breathing again. And the arrest that will one day stun this town has already begun its slow, inevitable approach. The first real movement doesn't come from a dramatic phone call or a sudden confession. It comes from a review meeting, fluorescent lights humming overhead, coffee gone cold, as detectives sit with a case that has outlived careers. The paper smells old. The ink looks tired. Names that once belonged to young officers now belong to retirees, some deceased, some unreachable. and yet the facts remain frozen in place, waiting for someone reckless enough to disturb them. They start at the beginning because cold cases punish shortcuts. Every report is read aloud. Every assumption is challenged. Why this timeline? Why that witness? Why this lead was dropped? Why that one was pursued too long? The questions feel almost accusatory, but no one takes offense. This isn't about blame anymore. It's about gravity, about understanding how an entire investigation could orbit the truth without ever touching it. One detail starts to itch. A small inconsistency buried in early notes. Not wrong enough to stand out back then. Just strange enough to matter now. A time stamp that doesn't quite align. A statement repeated too perfectly across interviews. Consistency that feels rehearsed rather than remembered. The kind of thing that slips past when pressure is high and resources are thin. They pull the original evidence list. Some items are gone, destroyed according to policy, victims of time and storage limitations. Others remain sealed and preserved, handled by hands that believe science would one day do more than it could then. Clothing, fibers, a single object recovered near the presumed route taken that night. Back then it was cataloged, photographed, and set aside as inconclusive. Now it's handled like something alive. Technology has changed the rules. What once required luck now requires patience. What once produced nothing now whispers possibilities. Samples too small to matter in the past are suddenly enough. Partial profiles can speak if you ask them the right way. The lab doesn't promise answers, only clarity. And clarity, in a case like this, can be terrifying. While the evidence is re-examined, detectives step back into the town, careful not to announce themselves. They don't want performances. They want memory. They talk to people who were young then, now older, slower, less guarded. Time erodes loyalty in ways interrogation never can. Regrets accumulate. Secrets grow heavy. The past no longer feels protected by the future. Some refuse to talk. Doors close politely but firmly. Others talk too much, offering theories instead of facts, gossip instead of recollection. But every conversation leaves something behind. A tone shift, a hesitation, a name repeated too often. Patterns emerge not from what is said, but from how it's said. Investigators listen for what people avoid. One name surfaces again. Not loudly, not accusatorily. Just there, hovering on the edges of conversations. Someone who was present but never central. Helpful but forgettable. Close enough to know details. Far enough to avoid suspicion. Back then, they were cleared quickly. No record. No motive anyone could articulate. Just another local, absorbed into the background of a small town where everyone knows everyone or thinks they do. The file on this person is thin, almost insulting in its brevity. A short interview. A note, cooperative. Another note, nothing to pursue. It reads like relief, like someone was glad not to look closer. That doesn't mean it was wrong at the time. It means it was human. Detectives rebuild this person's life from the year of the disappearance forward. Jobs held. Relationships formed and dissolved. Moves made quietly. Patterns of behavior that mean nothing alone, but begin to speak collectively. There's no smoking gun, no obvious violence, no criminal history that screams danger. Just a life that seems slightly off rhythm, as if always adjusting to something unseen. Then the lab calls. It's not definitive. Not yet, but it's enough to change posture in a room. A partial match. A genetic marker that aligns with something recovered decades ago. Not enough to accuse. Enough to justify attention. Enough to turn a name into a subject. The town doesn't know any of this yet. It continues to live in the space between memory and forgetting. But inside the investigation, the air changes. Conversations sharpen. Emails multiply. Every action now carries weight. They are no longer asking if the case can be solved. They are asking how far the truth will reach when it finally surfaces. Surveillance begins quietly, not the dramatic kind, just observation, routine checks, public records, digital footprints that didn't exist in 1979. People reveal themselves differently online. They curate their lives, their values, their grievances. Sometimes what they hide is louder than what they share. Interviews are scheduled under neutral pretenses. A follow-up, A routine update. No accusations. Just questions asked with the calm of people who have waited decades. The subject appears cooperative, just as before, polite, measured, familiar with the rhythms of authority. Too familiar, maybe. Answers come quickly. Too quickly. Dates recall with unnatural precision. Emotions describe without texture. There is no anger, no fear, no confusion. Only smooth narratives that glide past scrutiny if you let them. Detectives don't let them. They ask the same questions in different ways. They circle back. They pause. Silence does its work. A flicker crosses a subject's face when a specific detail is mentioned, something that shouldn't matter. A route, a time, an object never released to the public. The moment passes, but it's seen, noted, filed away. After the interview, the room feels smaller, the kind of small that comes from proximity to something volatile. Detectives don't celebrate. They don't speculate out loud. They know better. Cold cases don't resolve in a straight line. They twist. They retaliate. They expose more than you intend. The lab results advance slowly, methodically. Each update narrows the field, reduces uncertainty. The partial match strengthens. Statistical probabilities climb. What was once unlikely becomes plausible. What was plausible becomes probable. The language shifts from maybe to consistent with, and consistent with in this context is seismic. Legal teams get involved early. Warrants require justification that can withstand scrutiny. Decades-old cases invite doubt by default. Memories fade. Evidence ages. Defense attorneys will argue contamination, coincidence, confirmation bias. Investigators anticipate every move. They overprepare. They assume nothing. Another interview is scheduled. This one is different, more formal, recorded with intention. The subject arrives calm but alert, sensing the shift even if they can't articulate it. Questions land heavier now. Timelines tighten. Contradictions are placed gently on the table, not as traps, but as facts. The subject adjusts, revises, explains. It's subtle, but the story evolves. Not dramatically enough to alarm someone unfamiliar with the case. Enough to matter to those who know every previous version by heart. Truth doesn't usually break. It erodes. Outside, the town remains unaware. Kids play in yards. Churches prepare for Sunday. Life continues unbothered by the fact that a reckoning is inching closer. The arrest that will leave the community stunned is not yet visible, but its shadow is forming, stretching backward through time, toward a night when a porch light clicked off and silence took over. And silence, after all these years, is finally being asked to speak. Night has a way of returning when you talk about it long enough. The detectives feel it as they leave the station. The air heavier, the streets quieter than they should be. This case is no longer paper and procedure. It has weight now. It follows them home. It waits in the dark between thoughts. 35 years ago, a different night swallowed the town whole, and for the first time since then, something is pushing back. They go back to the map, not the clean digital version, but the original hand-marked, coffee-stained diagram that once sat on a corkboard and gathered dust. Routes traced in pen, circles drawn, erased, redrawn, the presumed path, the alternative path, the place where the search dogs lost a scent. At the time, it was treated as failure. Now it looks deliberate, a choice, not a mistake. They overlay the old map with new data. Cell towers didn't exist then, but geography didn't change. Roads curve the same way. Tree lines still shield certain angles. The distance between 2 points remains unforgivingly exact. One route is shorter, faster, riskier. The other is longer but hidden, shielded from sight by elevation and shadow. Someone familiar with the area would know this. Someone patient. Someone not in a hurry because they didn't think they had to be. Attention turns to vehicles. Back then, descriptions were vague. A car seen idling. Another reported speeding. Colors that shift depending on who remembers them. But one report stands out, not because it's dramatic, but because it's precise. A neighbor wrote down a license plate number. Incomplete. 3 characters. Considered useless at the time. Filed and forgotten. Now it's gold. Databases do what memory couldn't. Patterns emerge. registrations narrowed, owners cross-referenced. One vehicle remains possible, not proven, possible, registered within a mile of where the scent vanished, owned by someone whose name has already begun to feel heavier in the room. Investigators don't rush. Rushing is how this case died the first time. They build quietly. They confirm alibis not with testimony, but with documentation. Pay stubs, school records, utility bills, ordinary artifacts of ordinary lives. Lies hide in the mundane, not the dramatic. A former co-worker is located, older now, less guarded. Time has taken the edge off loyalty. They remember a conversation from years ago, one that felt strange even then, a joke made in poor taste, a comment about being around more than people think. At the time, it was brushed off. Now it lands differently. Context is everything. Another witness comes forward after hearing rumors of the case being reopened. They were young then, afraid, unsure what mattered. They remember seeing someone near the edge of the property that night, someone they recognized but didn't want to involve. The fear wasn't the person, not exactly. It was of being wrong, of causing trouble. Silence felt safer. That silence lasted decades. Investigators document everything. They don't push witnesses to say more than they know. They let memory do what pressure never could. Details surface slowly. A jacket, a posture, a habit of standing just out of direct light. Each piece alone is fragile. Together, they form a silhouette. The lab calls again. This time the tone is different. Controlled, careful, the kind of voice used when words have consequences. The DNA profile has been expanded. Familial connections identified. A relative, then another. A family tree built backward, branch by branch, until it narrows. The math is merciless. Probability climbs into territory that doesn't allow coincidence. The name at the center of the tree is no longer just a subject, it's a focal point. Legal teams convene again. Discussions are quieter now, more deliberate. This isn't about if a warrant can be issued. It's about when and how airtight it needs to be. An arrest made too early risks collapse. An arrest made too late risks something worse. Escape, destruction of evidence, or a confession rehearsed enough to sound believable. Surveillance tightens. Patterns are observed. Daily routines mapped. The subject's life is unremarkable on the surface. Work, home, occasional social visits. No outward signs of panic. No visible cracks. That's often the most dangerous moment, when someone believes they've outrun the past. Detectives revisit the original crime scene, now altered by time. New buildings, different owners. But the land remembers. Soil layers are tested. Ground-penetrating radar sweeps areas once dismissed as irrelevant. Technology hums where search dogs once circled in confusion. Nothing is found, and yet the absence feels intentional. Like something was meant to be found there, but wasn't. A removal, a relocation, a decision made under pressure. They expand the search radius. Old wells, abandoned sheds, properties linked through quiet transactions. One location stands out, not because of evidence, but because of timing. Purchased shortly after crime, sold years later at a loss. Never developed, just held, as if ownership itself mattered more than use. A warrant is approved. The search is methodical. No media, no sirens, just measured steps in careful hands. They don't expect to find a body after all this time. They expect residue, traces something the earth refused to erase. And the earth delivers. Fragments, not dramatic, not recognizable, but human, confirmed by analysis. Age consistent, time frame consistent. The location aligns with a longer, hidden route on the map, the one that required familiarity, the one that avoided witnesses. The room goes silent when the report comes in. Not shock, not triumph, something heavier. The understanding that this isn't just about solving a case. It's about reopening a wound that never healed properly, about telling a town that its sense of safety was built on an omission. The arrest plan is finalized. They choose the timing carefully. Morning, predictable, less volatile. The subject is taken into custody without incident. No resistance, no questions, just a quiet compliance that unsettles everyone present. Neighbors watch from windows, confused. This person has lived among them for decades, attended barbecues, fixed fences, nodded politely in passing. News breaks fast, faster than anyone expects. Phones light up, social media ignites. The words cold case and arrests collide in headlines like opposing forces. The community reels. Some refuse to believe it. Others feel something click into place. Memories reinterpreted through a new lens. Interrogation begins. The subject sits across from detectives, posture controlled, expression neutral. They've had decades to prepare for this moment, whether consciously or not. The opening questions are gentle. Background, routine, no accusations. The goal isn't confession. It's fracture. Details are introduced slowly. The license plate fragment, the witness statements, the familial DNA. Each piece placed carefully, like weight on a shelf already bending. The subject listens, adjusts breathing, maintains composure, until one detail lands wrong. A fact that shouldn't be known. A location never released. A decision only the person involved would recognize is true. The reaction is brief. A tightening of the jaw. A pause too long to be natural. It's enough. Silence stretches. The kind that forces truth to surface or suffocate. The subject speaks again, but the voice has changed. Less smooth, more brittle. They deny involvement, but the denial lacks conviction. It sounds practiced, old, like a story told too many times in an empty room. Detectives don't push harder. They let the silence return. They know the truth doesn't always come in words. Sometimes it comes in the way someone avoids them. Outside the room, preparations continue. Charges are drafted. Evidence is compiled. The case that once gathered dust now fills tables. Years of waiting collapse into hours of action. The town holds its breath. Because even with an arrest, even with evidence, the past isn't done speaking. And what it has left to say may be more devastating than anyone is prepared to hear. Morning arrives without relief. Sunlight spills over rooftops and storefronts, indifferent to the tension tightening behind closed doors. Coffee brews. Cars idle. Life performs its rituals while the town carries a new weight in its chest. An arrest has been made, yes, but arrests don't end stories. They sharpen them. Inside the interrogation room, the air is stale, recycled, heavy with the residue of denial. The suspect sits alone now, hands folded, eyes fixed on a point just above the table, as if focusing on something beyond reach. The bravado from the initial questioning has thinned. What remains is calculation. Not fear exactly. Something colder. Assessment. Detectives re-enter without urgency. No raised voices. No dramatic reveals. Pressure doesn't come from force here. It comes from inevitability. They lay out time itself as evidence. 35 years of silence. 35 years of decisions made daily to keep a secret intact. Every birthday passed. Every holiday attended. Every moment that required pretending nothing had happened. They begin again, this time not with questions, but with facts. The fragments recovered from the property. The soil composition. The depth. The manner of concealment. Not accusations. Observations. Each one slices a little closer to the truth. The suspect listens, nodding occasionally, as if acknowledging a lecture rather than a reckoning. But the rhythm of breathing shifts. A foot taps once, then stills. Outside, analysts pore over old case files with renewed clarity. What once looked like chaos now reveals structure. Missed appointments. Sudden relocations. A job change that aligned too neatly with the timeline. These weren't coincidences. They were corrections. Adjustments made by someone who believed they were smarter than circumstance. Witnesses are recontacted. Some are eager now, energized by the idea that the truth might finally surface. Others are reluctant, ashamed of how little they said when it mattered most. Memory is fragile, but guilt preserves detail. A smell, a sound, a feeling that something was wrong, dismissed at the time because it was inconvenient. One former friend recounts a night of heavy drinking years after crime. A confession that wasn't a confession. A sentence dropped casually, wrapped in humor, designed to test reaction. It was laughed off then. Now it echoes like a scream swallowed by walls. The prosecution team builds their case in layers. Circumstantial becomes cumulative. Patterns become proof. They know the defense will argue time, degradation, doubt. They know the jury will be asked to believe that the past is unreliable. So they anchor everything in what time cannot touch: behavior, choice, opportunity. Back in the interrogation room, the suspect finally speaks again, unprompted. It starts with grievance, about being targeted, about technology playing judge and jury, about how unfair it is to rewrite history with modern tools. The detectives let it flow. Anger loosens tongues better than threats. Then comes the pivot, a subtle shift from denial to explanation, from "I wasn't there" to "things were different back then." Language betrays intent. The room tightens. Every word is documented, every pause measured. They don't interrupt when the suspect stops talking. Silence becomes the loudest presence. It fills the space, presses against ears, demands resolution. Finally, the suspect exhales sharply, like someone releasing a breath held for decades. "I didn't plan it," they say. The sentence lands hard. Not a confession in full, but enough. The detectives exchange a glance that says everything. Planning is irrelevant now. Admission has cracked the dam. What follows spills out unevenly, fragmented by time and self-preservation. A meeting that went wrong. A moment of panic. A decision made too fast to undo. Details emerge that align too closely with evidence to dismiss. The hidden route, the location, the method, things never released to the public, things only one person could know. Outside, the town absorbs the news in waves. Some feel vindicated. Others feel betrayed. The suspect had been a neighbor, a colleague, a familiar face in familiar places. The idea that evil could blend so seamlessly into daily life unsettles more than the crime itself. Vigils form quietly. Candles flicker. Names are spoken aloud again after years of absence. For the family of the victim, the relief is complicated. Answers don't restore what was taken. They rearrange grief, giving it sharper edges and clearer focus. Court proceedings begin with measured gravity. No theatrics. Just a steady recitation of facts long buried. The defense challenges everything. The timeline, the witnesses, the science, but the foundation holds. Each challenge met with documentation. Each doubt answered with convergence. The suspect watches from the defense table, expression unreadable. Sometimes eyes close briefly, as if revisiting a place only they can see. Sometimes a muscle twitches in the jaw. Regret remains elusive. What shows instead is exhaustion, the fatigue of carrying a lie longer than most people carry a marriage. As testimony unfolds, the community listens. This isn't just about one person's guilt. It's about the years spent wondering, the parents who never stopped waiting, the children who grew up with absence as inheritance, the investigators who carried failure like a personal flaw. When the verdict comes, it doesn't arrive with cheers or gasps. It arrives with quiet acceptance. Guilty. The word echoes softly, heavy but expected. Justice, delayed and imperfect, finally speaks. Sentencing follows. The judge acknowledges time, not as a mitigating factor, but as an amplifier. 35 years without accountability. 35 years of stolen peace. The sentence reflects that weight. As the suspect is led away, no one meets their eyes, not out of hatred, out of finality. The story that dominated whispers and speculation for decades has reached its end, but endings don't erase echoes. The town will move forward. It always does. New stories will rise. New scandals will distract. But somewhere in the quiet hours, the memory of this case will surface again, not as fear, but as a reminder that the past waits patiently. That truth does not expire, and that even the coldest cases still breathe, just beneath the surface, until someone finally listens close enough to hear them. The verdict settles, but it does not settle the town. It moves through it like a low-pressure system, altering the air without tearing anything down, changing how people breathe. Conversations pause when certain names are mentioned. Doors close a little more deliberately. Trust, once assumed, now asks for credentials. In the days after the sentencing, reporters arrive late, chasing a story that has already bled out its shock. Camera crews linger near the courthouse steps, hoping for emotion that never quite materializes. There are no screaming matches, no dramatic outbursts, just faces carved by time, by patience worn thin, by a justice that came too slowly to feel victorious. Inside homes across the county, people revisit their own memories of that year, 1979, 1986, or whatever year the case first ruptured normal life. They remember where they were when the news broke, who they were with, what they thought then. Memory rewinds without warning, pulling them back to a version of themselves that still believed answers came quickly. Investigators return to their offices, not to celebrate, but to inventory. Evidence boxes are sealed again, this time with finality. Reports are archived. The case is technically closed, but closure is a bureaucratic word. It does not account for what lingers in the mind. One detective admits, quietly, that solving it feels less like winning, and more like putting down a weight they forgot they were carrying. The confession is dissected line by line. Analysts study tone, hesitation, the subtle deflections even in admission, what was said, what was avoided. Truth, even when spoken, rarely arrives whole. It limps in missing pieces, shaped by self-interest. There are still questions without answers, details that evaporated with time, motives that remain stubbornly opaque. Why that night? Why that place? Why that person? The suspect, now a convicted killer, sits in a cell far from the town that once knew them. The walls are bare, the routine unforgiving. For the first time in decades, there is no need to maintain a double life, no more recalculations, no more scanning faces for recognition. In the absence of performance, something else emerges, not remorse necessarily, reflection, the kind that comes too late to matter. Letters arrive at the prison, some hateful, some curious, a few sympathetic in ways that disturb even the guards. The killer reads them all, keeps none. In one interview request later denied, they ask a single question: do they talk about me? As if legacy were still negotiable. Back in the community, the victim's family navigates a new phase of grief. For years, hope was their fuel. Now hope has nowhere to go. It collapses inward, turning into something quieter, heavier. They visit the grave with different words on their lips. Less pleading, more telling. Updates about the world the victim never saw. Apologies for the time it took. A memorial fund is established. Scholarships, a bench in the park, symbols of endurance. Some residents attend the dedication. Others avoid it, unsure of their right to participate after years of silence. Guilt spreads unevenly, touching people who never did anything wrong but wish they had done more. The case inspires new attention to other cold files. Shelves are reopened, evidence re-examined. Technology doesn't sleep. It waits. DNA databases expand. Algorithms refine. Patterns emerge where none were visible before. Detectives speak cautiously, but optimism flickers. If this case could be solved after 35 years, maybe others aren't as dead as they seem. Still, skepticism remains. Not every mystery ends with handcuffs. Some dissolve into probability, leaving behind only theories and footnotes. This case was an exception, a convergence of persistence, science, and luck. No one pretends otherwise. At night, the town feels different. Quieter, but not calmer. Streetlights cast longer shadows. The familiar looks unfamiliar when examined too closely. Parents watch their children with an intensity born from memory, not paranoia. They know now that danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waves from across the yard. In interviews, officials emphasize resilience, community strength, the importance of never giving up. It's a language of aftermath, polished and reassuring. But beneath it lies a more uncomfortable truth. The system did not save the victim. Time did not heal the wound. What solved the case was refusal. A refusal to forget. A refusal to accept absence as an ending. The killer's name begins to fade from headlines. That, too, is a kind of justice. Infamy starves without attention. What remains is the victim's story, retold with clarity instead of speculation. Who they were, what they loved, the life interrupted, not defined by violence. Years from now, someone will ask about the case. Maybe a student, maybe a new resident. The answer will be measured, careful. A summary that cannot capture the weight of waiting, the slow grind of uncertainty. They will hear that it was solved, that there was an arrest, that technology played a role. They will nod, satisfied, and move on. But those who lived it will know better. They will remember the unanswered phone calls, the rumors that poisoned friendships, the way every knock on the door felt like it could change everything. And in that memory, the case never truly ends. It becomes a cautionary tale etched into local consciousness, a reminder that truth is not always loud, that justice is not always swift, and that sometimes the most dangerous thing a seeker can do is survive long enough to feel normal. The town exhales, but it does not forget. It listens now, closer than before. The aftermath stretches longer than anyone expects, not in headlines but in habits. People drive different routes home without realizing why. They lock doors that were once left open. A town that spent decades living beside an unanswered question now has to learn how to live without it. And that turns out to be harder than the waiting ever was. Law enforcement holds a closed-door debrief, a ritual more than a necessity. They go over timelines that are already etched into their minds, rewatch interrogation footage they know by heart, pause on moments where the truth almost surfaced and slipped away. There is no celebration in the room, only a shared understanding that they were outpaced by time and rescued by science. One investigator admits that if the technology had arrived 5 years later, the suspect might have died free. The room goes quiet at that. The evidence room smells like cardboard and dust. Boxes are stacked with finality that feels ceremonial. Inside them, objects that once screamed for attention now sit inert. Fibers, photographs, handwritten notes, cassette tapes labeled in fading ink. Each item once carried hope, suspicion, fear. Now they're artifacts, proof that persistence can outlast memory. Outside, rumors don't die easily. Even with conviction, alternative theories continue to circulate in whispers. Someone insists there was an accomplice. Someone else claims a cover-up that never materialized. Conspiracy has a way of thriving where trust was broken long ago. Officials deny it all, calmly, repeatedly, knowing denial rarely satisfies curiosity. The suspect's past is pulled apart in public. Every year of their life retroactively stained. Old co-workers are interviewed, neighbors tracked down, classmates contacted. Most say the same thing. Quiet, normal, forgettable. It is the most unsettling description of all. Evil without spectacle, violence without warning signs. A former friend recalls a moment they never thought mattered, a joke that went too far, a stare held too long. At the time it felt insignificant. Now it feels prophetic. Memory rearranges itself to make room for guilt, even when guilt has nowhere to land. The victim's name is spoken more often now, but always carefully, like something fragile. Their stories reclaimed from the margins, no longer defined by how they died, but by how they lived. Childhood photos resurface, school records, old letters, a life reconstructed from fragments, stitched together by people who refuse to let it be reduced to a case number. The family gives one final statement. No anger, no forgiveness, just facts. Gratitude for the investigators who never let go. Pain for the years stolen by silence. They say justice came, but it came late, and lateness has a cost no sentence can repay. In prison, the convicted killer adjusts to routine. Lights on, lights off, meals slid through slots. Days measured in counts and concrete. The notoriety fades quickly. New inmates arrive with fresher crimes, louder reputations. The past that once dominated their life is now a static presence, unchanging, inescapable. Psychologists debate the confession. Was it relief or calculation? Truth or strategy? Some argue the killer wanted to control the narrative one last time. Others believe the weight finally broke them. The debate remains academic. The result does not change. The town council proposes a community forum, a place to talk openly about the case and its impact. Attendance is mixed. Some want to speak. Others want to move on. A few sit silently, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the floor, carrying private connections they will never share. Teachers notice changes in their classrooms. Students ask questions about justice, about time, about whether bad people always get caught. There are no easy answers. Educators tread carefully, aware that this case is no longer history. It is local mythology still forming. Late one evening, a detective drives past the original crime scene. It looks smaller than they remember. Ordinary, almost harmless. They pull over without knowing why, step out of the car, and stand there listening to the quiet. No sirens, no cameras, just the sound of insects and distant traffic. This is what the case has always been fighting against. Normalcy. The way horror can vanish into routine if no one keeps looking. National attention shifts elsewhere. Another arrest, another tragedy. The news cycle moves on, hungry as ever. For the town, though, the case has altered the timeline permanently. There is before and there is after, and the line between them is sharp. Cold case units across the country take note. Training seminars reference the investigation. Protocols are updated. The lesson is clear. Preserve everything, even what seems useless, even what technology cannot yet read. Time changes tools. Evidence waits. Some nights, residents swear they dream differently now. Less anxiety, but more clarity. Dreams where questions are answered but not erased, where the past speaks plainly and then falls silent. Justice, it turns out, does not roar. It settles, slowly, unevenly, leaving behind a landscape forever altered by what it took so long to uncover. And beneath it all, a quiet understanding spreads, shared but rarely spoken aloud. The truth was always there. It just needed enough time, enough pressure, enough refusal to stay buried. Time doesn't snap back into place after an arrest. It drags. It stretches. It leaves behind gaps where certainty should live. Weeks pass, and the town begins to notice the quieter consequences, the subtle aftershocks that never make the news but shape everything that follows. Court dates are scheduled, postponed, rescheduled again. Legal language replaces police jargon. Warrants give way to motions. The case enters a new phase, slower, colder, governed by procedure instead of pursuit. Inside the courthouse, the air feels heavier than the jail ever did. Wooden benches polished by decades of restless hands. Fluorescent lights humming above heads bowed in anticipation. The suspect is brought in wearing neutral colors, no expression, no drama. Cameras click once, twice, then stop. There is nothing left to capture. The moment of spectacle has passed. What remains is process. Prosecutors lay out the narrative with precision, building a structure meant to withstand attack. They speak of timelines, of movements measured in minutes, of evidence that waited decades to speak. They do not raise their voices. They don't need to. The facts do the work now. Each sentence tightens the space around the defendant, shrinking the room until there is nowhere left to look but forward. The defense responds with doubt. They always do. They question memory. They question technology. They question the motivations behind confession that arrived so late it feels suspicious by default. They argue contamination, coincidence, the fallibility of systems built by humans. It's their job to pull at the seams, to see if anything unravels. In the gallery, the victim's family listens without reacting. They have trained themselves for this. Years of waiting taught them how to sit still, while others dissect the worst moment of their lives. Their faces don't change, but their hands betray them. Fingers interlaced too tightly, knuckles pale, breath measured. Outside, reporters fill the gaps with speculation. Analysts debate the strength of the case. Podcasts revisit old theories, sometimes responsibly, sometimes recklessly. The story takes on new layers, some useful, some dangerous. Misinformation creeps back in, try to reclaim ground it lost when the truth finally emerged. Law enforcement stays quiet. They've learned that silence is safer now. Every word can be twisted, every statement challenged. The investigation is over, but scrutiny isn't. They wait for the verdict like everyone else, aware that no outcome will feel complete. In the evidence vault, items are pulled one last time for trial. Gloves snap. Seals are checked and rechecked. Chain of custody logs are reviewed with near religious care. There is no room for error at this stage. One mistake could undo everything. An expert witness explains the science in plain terms. DNA, once invisible, is now undeniable. Patterns, once meaningless, now form signatures. The courtroom listens, some understanding, some pretending to. The takeaway is simple, even if the method is complex. The past left fingerprints it couldn't erase. The defendant watches without visible reaction. No shaking, no tears, just stillness. Psychologists note it later, parsing body language like scripture. Is it resignation? Is it calculation? Or is it simply the absence of surprise after decades of knowing the truth would surface eventually? Jury selection begins, slow and methodical. Ordinary people asked to carry extraordinary weight. They swear impartiality, but the case has already lived in their mind for years. Everyone in the room knows it. Justice pretends to be blind, but memory has excellent vision. Back in the town, routines continue. Stores open. Schools run. Life insists on itself. But conversations shift. The case becomes a reference point, a marker of endurance. People talk about where they were when the arrest was announced, as if recalling a storm or an eclipse. At night, lights stay on longer in some houses. In others, windows are finally opened. Closure, it turns out, doesn't move in one direction. It spreads unevenly, finding cracks, settling where it can. The trial looms, a final confrontation between what happened and what could be proven. Everyone senses it. The air is charged not with fear this time, but with expectation. The truth has stepped into the open. Now it must survive the light. The trial begins without ceremony. No dramatic entrance. No swelling music. Just a scrape of chairs and the murmur of people settling into positions they never wanted. The judge's voice cuts through the room, steady and practiced, reminding everyone that this is not a story, not a spectacle, but reckoning governed by rules older than the building itself. The words hang there, heavy, almost ironic, because everyone knows this case has already lived as a story for decades, whispered, speculated, distorted, and now stripped bare. Opening statements arrive like opposing storms. The prosecution moves first, controlled, deliberate, laying out a chronology that feels less like a timeline and more like a tightening net. They speak of a night long ago, of choices made in shadows, of silence that stretched into years. They don't dramatize. They let the absence do the talking. A missing person, a broken routine, a life interrupted so completely it left a vacuum the town never filled. The defense follows, careful not to deny the pain, careful not to anger the room. They speak of reasonable doubt like a lifeline, of the danger of trusting new interpretations of old evidence, of a human desire for closure that can sometimes outrun certainty. They remind the jury that time erodes memory, that even science has limits, that an arrest is not a verdict. Their words are smooth, but they bounce off a room already leaning forward. Witnesses take the stand one by one, each adding a layer, each reopening wounds that never fully healed. A former detective, hair now gray, recounts the early days of the investigation, the confusion, the pressure, the leads that went nowhere. His voice cracks not when he talks about failure, but when he talks about persistence, about refusing to let a name fade from the board even when the world moved on. A forensic analyst follows, translating complexity into clarity. They explain how evidence once considered useless became decisive, how technology didn't change the facts, only revealed them. Screens light up with charts and images, sterile and unforgiving. The past rendered visible, measurable, undeniable. Jurors lean in despite themselves. The family testifies next, and the room changes. This is no longer about methods or margins of error. This is about birthdays missed, chairs left empty, the constant ache of not knowing whether to grieve or hope. Their words are simple, almost restrained, but the restraint makes them heavier. They are not asking for sympathy. They are stating what the crime stole and never returned. Cross-examination tries to reclaim control, to slow the emotional current. Questions are precise, almost clinical. Dates, distances, certainties. But even here, the truth resists fragmentation. Each attempt to isolate a detail only reinforces a larger picture, the accumulation of small facts pointing in the same direction. The defendant finally takes a stand, and the room stills in a way it hasn't before. This is the moment everyone anticipated, feared, rehearsed in their minds. The answers come measured, cautious. Denials wrapped in explanation. Admissions trimmed of intent. The confession is addressed, reframed as confusion, as pressure, as a misunderstanding born from exhaustion and age. It's a careful performance, but performances leave traces too. The prosecution waits, then moves in. They don't accuse. They ask, why now? Why these details? Why facts that were never public? The questions land softly but stick. Silence stretches between answers. The defendant looks down more often now. The past, once distant, feels closer, louder. Outside the courthouse, the town holds its breath. News vans idle. Phones buzz with updates stripped of nuance. Social media flares with certainty and counter-certainty. But inside those walls, the process grinds forward, immune to noise, indifferent to impatience. As the day ends, the jury is dismissed with instructions that sound routine but carry immense weight. Don't discuss. Don't research. Don't decide yet. They file out, ordinary faces carrying extraordinary responsibility. Knowing sleep will not come easily, the courtroom empties slowly. Papers are gathered. Lights dim. The echo of footsteps lingers. This is only the middle of the story, the part where everything is exposed but nothing is resolved. The truth is closer now, close enough to feel its breath, but still just out of reach, waiting for the moment when silence finally breaks. The waiting becomes its own kind of torment. Hours stretch into something elastic, bending around every thought, every memory, every unspoken fear. The jury room door closes with a soft click that somehow sounds louder than anything before it. Inside, 12 strangers sit around a table scarred by time and indecision, carrying with them fragments of a life shattered decades ago. Outside, the courtroom breathes in shallow intervals, as if afraid to disturb whatever fragile balance now exists. Deliberations begin without drama. No raised voices. No immediate votes. Just silence, thick and cautious, as if the air itself needs permission to move. Someone clears their throat. Someone else straightens a stack of notes already read a dozen times. The evidence is laid out again, piece by piece, not as the prosecution framed it, not as the defense challenged it, but as it exists now, stripped of rhetoric. Facts, timelines, gaps. The confession looms large, impossible to ignore, impossible to accept without scrutiny. Words spoken in a small room years after the crime, recorded, replayed, dissected. Some jurors hear truth in the pauses, in the way details surface unprompted. Others hear uncertainty, the vulnerability of age, the possibility of suggestion. The room divides, not sharply, but subtly, like a fault line forming under pressure. They talk about technology, about how science reached backward through time to touch something once thought unreachable. DNA, data, probabilities that border on certainty, but never quite cross into absolute. Someone asks whether trust in machines has replaced trust in people. Someone else counters that machines don't lie, that they only reveal what was already there, waiting. The victim's face returns again and again, summoned not by photographs but by testimony. A life described through habits, through laughter, through absence. Jurors struggle to keep emotion from steering the wheel, but emotion keeps finding its way back in, seeping through cracks logic can't seal. This was not an abstract event. This was a person who never came home. Outside, the town vibrates with speculation. Cafes buzz with hushed debates. Radios replay sound bites until words lose meaning. Some residents feel vindicated, convinced a long shadow has finally found its source. Others feel uneasy, wary of rewriting history. So late in the game, the arrest reopened old arguments, reopened old wounds, forced everyone to choose between closure and caution. Back in the jury room, the clock ticks with merciless consistency. Votes are taken, tentative at first. Hands rise slowly, reluctantly. Not guilty. Guilty. The numbers shift, but not enough. Discussion resumes, deeper now, more personal. Jurors speak not just as analysts, but as people, drawing from their own lives, their own fears of being wrong, of condemning or absolving incorrectly. The weight of that responsibility presses down, heavy and unyielding. One juror talks about silence, about how silence can be a form of violence, how years of not knowing can hollow out a family. Another warns against letting sympathy replace proof, against mistaking a compelling narrative for an incontrovertible one. The room grows warmer, tempers flare briefly, then cool. This is not a battle. It's a slow negotiation with truth. As evening approaches, a breakthrough occurs, not dramatic, not loud, but decisive. A connection clicks into place for enough of them. A pattern that was once fragmented now aligns. The confession, the forensic evidence, the timeline gaps, they don't stand alone anymore. They reinforce each other, each answering questions the others raise. Doubt doesn't vanish, but it changes shape, shrinking from a wall into a shadow. Another vote. This time, the hands rise with less hesitation. The count settles. The foreperson exhales, a sound that carries years of tension in a single breath. A decision has been reached. The courtroom reconvenes under a different kind of silence, one sharpened by anticipation. Everyone stands as a jury files in, faces unreadable, eyes forward. The defendant watches them closely, searching for something. Mercy, certainty, a sign. The family holds hands, knuckles white, bracing for impact. The verdict is read. The words land with a dull finality that no amount of preparation can soften. Guilty. The sound ripples outward, through the room, through the building, into the town beyond. Some people gasp. Some close their eyes. The defendant remains still, as if absorbing a language long expected but never fully understood. Sentencing will come later. The judge reminds them, but the damage and the relief are already intertwined. Justice, when it arrives this late, is complicated. It doesn't rewind time. It doesn't restore what was lost. It simply names what happened and who bears responsibility. Outside, cameras capture reactions in fragments. A tearful statement, a clenched jaw, a simple nod. Headlines again forming before the sun sets, compressing decades into a few charged words. Cold case cracked, arrest justified, community stunned. The narrative solidifies, even as questions linger beneath the surface. Inside the courtroom, the family is allowed a moment. They stand where answers once stood, feeling the strange mix of validation and grief that no verdict can resolve. The absence remains, but now it has context. Now it has a shape. As night falls, the town feels different, quieter but not calmer. The mystery that defined it for so long has shifted, transformed into something else, an understanding that closure is not an ending, just another chapter written in heavier ink. The truth has spoken, but its echo will linger, reverberating through memories, through conversations, through the spaces where silence once lived. And somewhere between relief and sorrow, between certainty and doubt, the case settles into history, leaving behind a reminder that time may bury the truth, but it rarely destroys it. Sentencing day arrives without ceremony, without spectacle, carried on the same quiet morning air that once carried rumors and unanswered questions. The courthouse doors open early, and people drift inside, as if drawn by gravity rather than intention. Some faces are familiar now, regulars in the long vigil of this case. Others are new, pulled in by headlines and the promise of witnessing history settle into record. Inside, the defendant sits smaller than before. The confidence, if it ever existed, has been worn down by the verdict, by the relentless confirmation that the past is finally caught up. Hands folded, eyes fixed forward. The weight of decades presses down harder now, because there is no longer anywhere to hide from it. No more maybes, no more if-onlys. The judge enters. The room rises. The ritual feels ancient, almost theatrical, yet painfully real. This is where consequences are spoken aloud, where the abstract becomes permanent. The judge's voice is measured, careful, acknowledging the gravity of what is about to be decided. This is not just a punishment. It is a statement to the living and a reckoning for the dead. Victim impact statements come first. One by one, family members approach the podium, carrying years of grief in trembling hands. Words spill out unevenly, sometimes practiced, sometimes raw. They speak of birthdays missed, of holidays marked by empty chairs, of a life frozen at the age it ended. They talk about hope that refused to die, about nights spent imagining answers that never came. Their voices crack not because they are weak, but because they have carried too much for too long. The courtroom listens. Even the walls seem to lean in. Every sentence lands like a pulse, reminding everyone present that this case was never just about evidence or procedure. It was about loss that echoed through generations, about a wound that never healed because it was never acknowledged. Then the defendant speaks, or tries to. The words come slower, less certain than during confession. There's an apology, awkward and incomplete. There's an explanation that sounds more like justification, a tangled attempt to make sense of something that should never have happened. Some in the room listen intently. Others look away, unwilling to grant even this moment the dignity of their attention. The judge waits until the last word fades. Then comes the sentence. It is long. It is severe. It reflects not just a crime, but the years spent avoiding accountability. Each number, each condition, lands with mechanical precision, sealing the fate of a person who once walked free, while another lay buried in memory. There is no outburst, no dramatic collapse, just a quiet acceptance, or perhaps resignation, as deputies move closer, as paperwork is signed, as a life shifts irrevocably into confinement. Justice, when delivered this late, does not roar. It settles. Outside, reactions fracture into fragments. Some family members speak to reporters, their words careful, restrained, aware that nothing they say can fully capture what they feel. Others leave without comment, needing distance from cameras, from microphones, from the constant retelling of their pain. The town absorbs the news in waves. Radios hum. Phones buzz. Conversations pause mid-sentence as people process what the sentence means. For some, it confirms long-held suspicions. For others, it challenges memories they thought were settled. The arrest and conviction did more than solve a case. They forced the community to re-examine itself. Old rumors resurface, now reframed to the lens of truth. People replay past interactions, wondering if they missed signs, if they brushed too close to something dark without realizing it. Trust feels thinner, more fragile, but also more honest. The illusion of safety is cracked, replaced by something more sober. Investigators, now mostly out of spotlight, return to quieter routines. For them, the case is technically closed, but its residue remains. They carry it with them. Another reminder of why persistence matters, why boxes labeled cold are never truly frozen. The victory is muted, tempered by the understanding that success came too late to save a life. As days pass, the headlines move on. Other stories push their way to the front page. But beneath the surface, the impact lingers. Schools discuss it in hushed tones. Families revisit old conversations. The name of the victim, once a whisper, now holds a place in the town's collective memory that cannot be erased. At night, when the noise fades, there's a different kind of reckoning. People lie awake thinking about time, how it slips, how it hides things, how it sometimes circles back with unforgiving clarity. The case has been resolved, yes, but resolution is not the same as peace. The truth came out eventually, dragged into the light by technology, by persistence, by a refusal to forget. And in that light, everyone sees a little more clearly now, not just what happened, but what it cost to finally know. In the weeks after sentencing, silence settles in strange places. It fills the gaps where speculation once lived, where theories thrive because nothing concrete existed to replace them. Now there are facts, dates, names, a judgment stamped into public record, and yet the quiet feels heavier than the noise ever did. The victim's home becomes a point of gravity again, not the crime scene as it once was, stripped and cataloged, but the idea of it, the place where a life began, where routines formed, where the future was once assumed to be endless. Family members return there cautiously, touching walls, opening drawers, confronting objects that survived while a person did not. Some things are donated, some are kept, some are left exactly where they were, because moving them feels too much like another loss. Photographs resurface, old albums pull from shelves, smiling faces frozen in years untouched by what was coming. These images circulate again, shared on news segments and memorial posts, reminders of who the victim was before becoming a headline. Not a case number, not evidence. A human being with habits, jokes, dreams that never got the chance to evolve. Law enforcement holds a final press briefing, restrained and procedural. They speak of closure, of perseverance, of the importance of never giving up on unsolved cases. They avoid words like victory. They know better. This was not a win. It was a correction, a long overdue alignment between truth and consequence. Behind closed doors, investigators reflect on the turning points, the overlooked detail, the reprocessed evidence, the moment the confession shifted from hypothetical to real. These conversations are quieter, more personal. Each investigator carries their own version of the case, colored by where they were in life when it first landed on their desk. For some, it spanned entire careers. The defendant is transferred, processed into a system that did not know their name until recently. Inside concrete walls, time takes on a different texture. Days blur, nights stretch. The past replays endlessly, stripped of denial, stripped of distance. There is no audience here, no one convinced, only the echo of choices made decades ago. Letters begin to arrive at the courthouse. Some thank officials for their work. Others question how this could have gone unsolved for so long. A few express anger, not just at the perpetrator, but at the system that allowed years to pass without answers. Each letter is logged, read, archived. Another layer of history, forming around a single crime. Schools incorporate the case into discussions about justice and accountability. Parents answer difficult questions from children who are old enough to understand fear, but too young to fully process time. They talk about safety, about trust, about how bad things can happen even in familiar places, and how that doesn't mean hope disappears. The media revisits early coverage, replaying clips that now feel incomplete, almost naive. Anchors speak with hindsight, acknowledging mistakes, assumptions made when information was scarce. The narrative shifts from mystery to reflection, from who did it to why it took so long to know. At the center of it all is an absence that no development can fill. The victim is still gone. Justice did not bring them back. It did not rewind the clock or restore stolen years. What it did was draw a line in time, separating uncertainty from truth. People begin to talk differently now, with more care, with an understanding that unanswered questions don't always stay unanswered forever. The case becomes a cautionary tale and a reminder. Evidence waits. Memories surface. Secrets age poorly. And as the town slowly returns to its routines, there's an undercurrent of vigilance, a shared awareness that the past is never as buried as it seems. It watches. It waits. And sometimes when the moment is right, it demands to be heard. Time moves again, but differently now, not with the reckless speed it once had when questions piled up unanswered, but with a deliberate weight. Each day carrying the residue of what was uncovered, in kitchens and barbershops, in church basements and quiet office hallways. People speak in lower voices, as if the truth itself demands restraint. The case is technically over, but its presence lingers, threaded into conversations that were never meant to hold it. The family learns that closure is not a single moment. It does not arrive with a verdict or a sentence or a headline declaring resolution. It comes in fragments, in the ability to sleep through the night without imagining alternate endings, in the courage to drive past certain roads without gripping the steering wheel too tightly, in the slow reclaiming of memories that no longer feel poisoned by doubt. They meet privately with investigators one last time, not for updates, not for explanations, but for acknowledgement. Handshakes linger. Eyes hold longer than necessary. Words are sparse because most of what needs to be said has already been lived. Gratitude mixes with grief in a way that defies clean separation. Everyone understands that this partnership was forged in loss, and it will always carry that weight. Boxes of evidence are sealed and labeled for storage. Files that once occupied desks are archived, their pages now historical artifacts rather than active puzzles. Yet even as they are put away, they continue to teach. Future detectives will study them, learn from what was missed, from what was almost discarded. The case becomes a lesson carved into institutional memory. Technology, once the silent witness, now takes center stage in discussions across the state. Conferences reference the breakthrough. Training sessions emphasize preservation, patience, the long arc of forensic progress. There's a renewed respect for the idea that answers can arrive long after hope is thinned, that truth does not operate on human schedules. The community grapples with quieter, more unsettling realization. The person responsible lived among them for years, shopped in the same stores, attended the same events, exchanged pleasantries without raising alarms. This knowledge reframes the past, casting ordinary moments in a new, uneasy light. Trust feels more fragile now, less automatic. Some residents feel anger toward themselves for not seeing signs that may never have existed. Others reject that burden, recognizing the danger of hindsight. Still, the question lingers in the background, unspoken but persistent. How many truths walk unnoticed beside us every day? The location tied to the crime begins to change. Renovations, new ownership, fresh paint covering old walls. Yet no matter how altered the space becomes, it carries an imprint that cannot be scrubbed away. Locals know, they always will. Geography remembers even when structures do not. Anniversaries pass differently now. Dates that once reopened wounds now mark endurance. Candles are still lit, but they burn alongside a sense of vindication. The ritual shifts from pleading for answers to honoring survival. The loss remains, but it no longer exists in a vacuum of uncertainty. The convicted individual fades from public consciousness, reduced to a line in a database, a photograph attached to a number. Their name is spoken less frequently, and when it is, it carries no power. The story is no longer about them. It belongs to the victim, to the family, to a community that waited decades for the truth to surface. Late at night, when streets are empty and the world feels suspended, some still replay the case in their minds, not because they doubt the outcome, but because understanding something does not erase its impact. The mind returns to it the way the tongue finds a sore tooth, testing the edges of pain that is not fully healed. And yet, there is movement forward, subtle, earned, the kind that does not announce itself, but proves its existence through persistence. Life continues not because the past is resolved, but because it was finally named. The cold case is no longer cold, but it is not forgotten. It has become part of the town's identity, a scar that tells a story of patience, of reckoning, of the long and unforgiving wait for truth. The nights grow quieter, but not empty. Silence settles differently now, heavier in some corners, thinner in others, as if the town itself is relearning how to breathe. Police scanners no longer crackle with speculation about the case. News vans have disappeared, yet the absence of noise feels louder than the chaos that came before. This is what aftermath sounds like. In the family's home, photographs are rearranged. Some frames that were turned face down for years return to shelves. Smiles once too painful to face are allowed back into the room. These images do not rewrite history, but they reclaim it, pulling moments of joy out from under the shadow of violence. Memory, long held hostage by questions, begins to negotiate its release. One of the investigators wakes before dawn, as they still do out of habit. For decades, mornings began with a weight of unfinished business. Now there is an unfamiliar lightness, paired with an unexpected emptiness. The case had become a constant companion, a quiet pressure behind every decision. Its resolution leaves a space that no victory can fully occupy. They think about the early days, the missed chances, the technology that did not yet exist, the witnesses who forgot details not out of malice, but because time erodes even the sharpest recollections. Regret surfaces, but it no longer consumes. It informs. It sharpens resolve for the cases still waiting in the dark. Across town, a retired officer watches the evening news, barely listening. When the anchor mentions cold cases in general terms, their jaw tightens. They remember the frustration, the long nights under buzzing fluorescent lights, the sense of being close but never close enough. Closure arrives late for them too, filtered through distance and age, but it arrives nonetheless. The legal process moves forward with mechanical precision. Appeals are filed, motions argued, paperwork stacked high. Justice does not end with an arrest. It drags on, procedural and unglamorous. Yet each step reinforces the reality that the truth has weight now, recorded in ink, defended in courtrooms, preserved in precedent. Students at a local college study the case in criminal justice courses. Professors speak about evidence preservation, about the dangers of tunnel vision, about the evolution of forensic science. Young minds analyze what older ones once lived. The case becomes both warning and inspiration, proof that persistence can outlast decades of silence. For some residents, anger resurfaces in waves. They question how it took so long. They question institutions, systems, decisions made under pressure. Accountability is demanded not just from the perpetrator, but from the past itself. These conversations are uncomfortable, but necessary. They peel back layers of complacency that once hid behind the excuse of limited resources. Others respond differently. They cling to the idea that the truth, no matter how delayed, is better than permanent uncertainty, that imperfect justice is not the same as injustice denied. This tension fractures opinion, but also deepens understanding. The community is no longer united by mystery, but by debate. At night, the family sometimes dreams differently, not of the crime, not of the unknown, but of alternate futures that never came. Birthdays imagined, conversations never had. These dreams are bittersweet, painful yet honest. Grief shifts shape, becoming less sharp, more expansive, filling space rather than stabbing into it. The place where it all began is visited less frequently now. There is no need to stand vigil over a question that has been answered. Still, on certain days, someone leaves flowers. No note, no explanation, just a quiet acknowledgement that even solved stories deserve remembrance. Media retrospectives emerge, polished and dramatic. Old footage, new interviews, narratives carefully edited for impact. Some feel these pieces missed the point, focusing too much on the spectacle, too little on the years of waiting. Others welcome them, believing repetition keeps the lesson alive. The story evolves depending on who tells it. Late one evening, a family member writes a letter they will never send. It is addressed to no one in particular, filled with thoughts that have nowhere else to go. It speaks of anger, forgiveness, exhaustion, relief. When finished, the letter is folded and placed in a drawer, not to be forgotten, but to be contained. The town adjusts, slowly, imperfectly. Streets look the same. Businesses open and close as they always have. But something fundamental has shifted. A chapter that was stuck open has finally turned, revealing pages beneath it that few expected to see. This is not peace. It is something more complicated. A coexistence of clarity and pain. A recognition that truth, once revealed, does not heal by itself. It simply removes a blindfold. What comes after is up to those left standing. And so the story continues not as a question, but as a reckoning, echoing through conversations, classrooms, courtrooms, and quiet moments alone, reminding everyone that some answers arrive late. But when they do, they change everything that follows. Time begins to behave differently once the truth is known. Days still pass at the same speed, but their meaning shifts. The calendar no longer circles an unanswered date, no longer marks anniversaries with a question mark. Instead, it marks them with weight, with fact, with a reality that cannot be undone. The suspect sits alone now, separated from the noise that once protected them. No crowds, no speculation, just walls, routine, and the slow drip of consequence. Interrogation rooms are replaced by holding cells, fluorescent lights by institutional gray. For years, they lived among the community unnoticed, folded into the background of ordinary life. Now anonymity is gone. The past is caught up not with fury, but with inevitability. Psychologists analyze the confession, the pauses, the contradictions, the moments where memory slips or sharpens. They debate motive, denial, delayed guilt. Some believe the truth emerged because it had to, because secrets decay from the inside. Others argue it surfaced only because technology forced it into the light. The argument never fully settles. Human behavior rarely does. In the courthouse, the victim's name is spoken aloud again and again. Each time, it lands differently. Once it was a symbol of mystery. Now it is anchored evidence to timelines to forensic certainty. Saying the name no longer summons speculation. It summons record. The family attends proceedings when they can. Sometimes they leave early. Sometimes they sit through every word, gripping each other's hands as if to stay upright. Justice is not cinematic here. There is no swelling music, no clean resolution. There's only process, and process is slow, deliberate, and emotionally unforgiving. Outside, the community watches from a distance. Curiosity gives way to reflection. People revisit their own memories, replaying casual interactions, searching for missigns. A neighbor, a co-worker, a familiar face now reframed by revelation. Trust, once assumed, becomes something people examine more closely. Local law enforcement quietly reviews other dormant files. Boxes are reopened. Evidence logs are checked. The success of this case creates momentum, but also pressure. If one truth survived decades, how many others are waiting? Hope spreads, but it is cautious. Experience has taught them that not every silence hides an answer. The media cycle slows, then pivots. News stories replace old headlines, but the case lingers in public consciousness, resurfacing in podcasts, documentaries, late-night conversations. It becomes part of the cultural fabric, a reference point when discussing justice delayed, technology advanced, patience rewarded. For the family, grief enters another phase. Anger, once sharp and outward, turns inward, quieter, heavier. They ask questions no court can answer. Why then? Why that day? Why us? These questions no longer seek resolution. They exist because they must. One evening, a family member visits a place they avoided for years. The air feels different, not lighter, just honest. They stand there longer than planned, breathing in the present, acknowledging the past without being consumed by it. This is not closure. It is coexistence. The investigators move on to other cases, but this one follows them. In training sessions, in late-night thoughts, in moments of doubt. It reminds them why details matter, why evidence must be preserved, why patience is not passive, but active, relentless. The town's children grow up hearing the stories secondhand. To them, it sounds almost unreal, like a legend from another era, a time before DNA kits, before databases, before answers traveled faster than silence. They listen with disbelief, unaware they are inheriting the lesson as much as the tale. As seasons change, memorials fade slightly under sun and rain. Names etched in stone remain. They always will. The truth does not erase loss. It reframes it, gives it context, gives it gravity. What was once an open wound becomes a scar, still visible, still sensitive, but no longer bleeding. And scars, unlike wounds, tell stories of survival as much as damage. The case no longer asks who did it. It asks something harder now. What do we do with the truth once we finally have it? In the end, the sound that remains is not a gavel, not a siren, not even confession replayed on the evening news. It is quieter than that. It is the sound of a town breathing again, unsure if it remembers how. Streets look the same. Houses stand where they always have. But the air carries a different density, as if truth has weight and it has finally settled over everything. The courtroom empties. Paperwork is filed. Dates are set. The legal machine continues forward with procedural calm, indifferent to the emotional wreckage left in its wake. For the system, this is resolution. For the people, it is something else entirely. Resolution suggests an ending. What they feel is more like arrival. They have reached a place they imagined for decades but never truly believed existed. The suspect is transferred, processed, absorbed into a world of locked doors and numbered routines. In that world, time is no longer something to outrun. It stretches, it repeats, it reflects. The past, once buried, now plays on a loop with no audience to impress, no mask to hide behind. There are no headlines in there, only memory. Some nights, the suspect speaks the truth again, not to investigators, not to lawyers, but to the ceiling, to the dark, to no one. Other nights, silence wins. No one knows which is worse. The family returns home after the final hearing. They sit at the same kitchen table where conversations once ended in tears, where hope was rationed carefully, where every phone call carried a possibility of news, and almost always delivered disappointment. Now the phone sits still. When it rings, it is about ordinary things. Groceries, appointments, weather. The ordinariness feels foreign at first, almost offensive, then slowly comforting. They sort through boxes that were never opened because opening them felt like betrayal. Inside are photographs, notes, receipts, fragments of a life pause mid-sentence. They touch these things differently now, not with desperation, but with reverence. Memory no longer competes with uncertainty. It finally has room to exist. Outside the home, the community continues its quiet reckoning. Conversations change tone. Certainty replaces speculation. Rumors dissolve. People apologize to each other for assumptions made, for words spoken too confidently, for looks held too long. Some apologies are accepted, some are not. Healing, like truth, does not arrive evenly. Law enforcement holds a private moment together. No cameras, no stopmints, just a shared acknowledgement that patience mattered, that evidence mattered, that believing a case was still alive made all the difference. They know this outcome will be used as an example, cited in presentations, held up as proof that time does not automatically defeat justice. But they also know how rare this victory is. Somewhere else, another family hears the story and feels something stir. Hope, cautious and fragile. They look at their own unanswered questions and wonder if time has been kind enough to preserve their truth too. The ripple spreads outward, quiet but persistent. Years from now, people will still talk about this case, but differently, not as a mystery, as a reminder that the past is not static, that silence is not proof of absence, that technology may change, but persistence is the constant. The place where it all began no longer feels cursed. It feels marked by loss, by waiting, by endurance, marked by the knowledge that truth does not always arrive when it is needed, but sometimes when it is finally possible. On an ordinary morning, the family visits the resting place once more. There are no cameras now, no reporters, just wind through trees, footsteps on gravel, names carved into stone. They speak softly, not because they're afraid of being heard, but because they no longer need to shout into the void. They tell the truth out loud one last time. They were never forgotten. The waiting mattered. The truth came home. As the day moves on, life resumes its unremarkable rhythm. Cars pass. Lights change. Somewhere a child laughs. Somewhere else, someone locks a door behind them for the night. The world does not stop for justice. It absorbs it. And in that quiet absorption, the case finally releases its grip. Not erased, not forgiven, but understood. A story once defined by absence, now defined by truth. A cold case no longer cold. A community no longer haunted by the question of what happened, but forever shaped by the answer.